It is 2:09 p.m. on May 7th, 1915. The R.M.S. Lusitania is 11 miles off the coast of Old Kinsale, Ireland, en route from New York to Liverpool, England. On board the great ocean liner is 1,959 people, more than half of whom will not survive the coming disaster. Currently racing towards the starboard side of the ship is a torpedo. In an instant, 350 pounds of explosives detonate into the side of the ship. The time is 2:10 p.m., and the Lusitania has just under 20 minutes to live. R.M.S. Lusitania, nicknamed the Greyhound of the Seas, was a 787-foot-long ocean liner built in 1906 by Cunard Line. Sitting at 31,550 gross tons, the Lusitania was a marvel of her time. She was able to sail up to 25 knots, or 29 miles per hour, and in 1909 she completed the fastest westbound crossing at 4 days, 16 hours, and 14 minutes, obtaining the Blue Riband record time, only for it to be taken by her sister ship, Maritime, the same year in September. For the most part, Lusitania had a very successful career without many problems. Until January of 1910. During a voyage from Liverpool to New York, the Lusitania encountered a rogue wave 75 feet high. The design of the Lusitania's bow allowed her to sail through the wave instead of riding over it. However, this meant that the ship's bridge and deck were vulnerable to the impact. As the ship broke through the wave, the water rolled over the deck and smashed into the bridge, permanently forcing it back a few inches. On May 1st, 1915, nearly a year after the outbreak of World War I, the Lusitania departed New York for Liverpool. This was to be her 202nd crossing, but it was going to be her last. At 1:20 p.m. on May 7th, 1915, Kapitan Lieutenant Walter Schwieger, the captain of U-boat U-20, spotted Lusitania on the horizon. In his log, Schwieger wrote, "Ahead and to starboard, 4 funnels and 2 masts of a steamer with course triangular to us, comes into sight. Ship is made out to be a large passenger steamer." He then ordered full speed to converge with the steamer. At 1:30 p.m., Captain William Thomas Turner ordered for Lusitania to make a turn to starboard, in order to bring the ship in line with the coast. At 2:09, Schwieger made an estimation that his target was traveling at 22 knots, and he gauged its distance to be at about 700 meters away, or just under half a mile. At 2:10 p.m., Schwieger gave the order to fire. The torpedo erupted from his submarine, and it soon reached a speed of 44 miles an hour. At that speed, the torpedo would reach the ship in 35 seconds. On board Lusitania, seaman Leslie Morton spotted the torpedo off the starboard of the ship. He later stated, "I looked at my watch and putting it into my pocket, I glanced round the starboard side. And, as roughly as I could judge, I saw a big burst of foam about 500 yards away, 4 points on the starboard bow." Oliver Bernard, who was standing in the Veranda Cafe at the time, recalled the moments before the impact. An American woman walked up beside him and asked, "That isn't a torpedo, is it?" He recalled being too spellbound to answer. "I felt absolutely sick." "There was little fear," Bernard said. "I did not think that anybody, even women and children, were so much terrified as they were astounded and stunned by the consciousness that the fears, cherished half in ridicule for 5 days previous, had at last been realized." The German bluff had actually come off. James Brooks, a chain salesman who came from Connecticut, was walking on the boat deck when some friends on the Morcone deck just above him, inviting him to join for a round of shuffleboard. As he climbed the stairs, he saw a foam trail moving quickly across the water. "Oh yes, I saw the torpedo coming," and exclaimed, "Torpedo!" and rushed to the rail just aft of the staircase and stood on one foot and leaned forward over to watch the explosion which I expected to see occur on the outside of the ship, he later recalled. At 2:10 p.m., Schwieger wrote in his log the German word for impact, Treff. The torpedo passed from view below the edge of the deck. "I saw it disappear, and for a bare second we all had a kind of hope that maybe it wouldn't explode," one passenger said. However, in an instant, 350 pounds of explosives detonated into the side of the Lusitania, at a point under the bridge about 10 feet below the waterline. Thousands of rivets in the steel plates that they held came loose over an area about 15 times greater than the hole itself, which was the size of a small house. The ship rolled to port violently before settling back, and for a moment it seemed that she wouldn't sink. However, whether it was a boiler exploding or ammunition igniting, approximately 30 seconds after the impact, a second muffled explosion erupted deep from within the bowels of the ship. This would be the final death knell for the Lusitania. A few minutes after impact, Lusitania's list to starboard became more and more prevalent. Lifeboats on the starboard side now hung 5 to 8 feet from the deck, with the ocean 60 feet below them. The lifeboats on the port side now swung inward, rendering them useless for now. About 3 minutes after impact, all the ship's power had failed. The rudder could no longer be operated, and all the ship's lights went out. From within the ship, thousands of screams began to rise as the corridors went black and elevators stalled. Isaac Lehman, a New York businessman, was shocked by the absence of effort to lower Lifeboat 18 on the port side of the ship. He demanded to know why sailors were not lowering the lifeboat. Their response was that Captain Turner had ordered them not to lower it. To this, Lehman drew the revolver he had in his pocket and he said, "To hell with the captain. Don't you see the boat is sinking? And the first man that disobeys my orders to launch the boat, I shoot to kill." The sailor complied and swung his axe to knock the straining pin. The heavy loaded boat swung forward, crushing everyone standing there between the boat and the wall. At least 2 passengers were killed instantly. Passengers and crew once again attempted to launch the lifeboat when it swung out and dumped all its occupants into the water. At around the same time, an explosion erupted from the deck in the direction of the bow. This was likely caused by water flooding a boiler room and coming into contact with a superheated tank. It had only been 14 minutes since the impact, and the Lusitania was sinking quickly. From U-20, Schwieger watched as the pride of British maritime sank. The ship was sinking with unbelievable rapidity. There was a terrific panic on her deck. Overcrowded lifeboats, fairly torn from their positions, dropped into the water. Desperate people ran helplessly up and down the decks. Men and women jumped into the water and tried to swim to empty overturned lifeboats. It was the most terrible sight I have ever seen. It was impossible for me to give any help. At 2:25, Schwieger sailed away from the doomed ocean liner. On board Lusitania, the ship was now listing heavily to port. Passengers who were attempting to escape the vessel had to walk with one foot on the walls of the ship and the other on the floor. The ship was still moving at about 4 knots, but sinking quickly. At 2:25, 15 minutes after the impact, water began quickly rising up the boat deck, flooding the bridge. The ship's list to port was at about 30 degrees at this time. Lusitania suddenly lurched forward into the water. A wave rolled over the deck, engulfing everything and everyone in its path. Third Officer Bestick, who was still on board, wrote, "All the despair, terror, and anguish of hundreds of souls passing into eternity composed that cry." As the ship sank and lower into the sea, the stern rose higher and higher into the air. Charles Laureate was watching the ship descend, and he was suddenly dragged under by its wireless antenna that once hung high in the air, but was now slapping against the sea. However, he was unable to free himself, and he swam away. From the ocean rose a loud and agonizing sound as the bow slammed into the sea floor. Lusitania's stern suddenly began to fall, and her great funnels became level with the ocean, creating a whirlpool that sucked nearby passengers into them. There was a crescendo of screams, the sound of steel bending, twisting, and breaking, a final groan as the R.M.S. Lusitania sank beneath the waves, disappearing from view entirely. The time was 2:27 p.m., nearly 18 minutes after the torpedo's impact, and Lusitania, greyhound of the seas, was gone. Left behind in the water were hundreds of passengers, screaming and crying for help. Help that for many would never come. The aftermath of Lusitania proved to be a pivotal point in history, as its loss shifted public opinion of the war and is one of the great causes for America's entry into the war. Today, Lusitania lies at a depth of 93 meters, or 305 feet. She's in terrible condition. Her back is broken midship, caused by the impact with the seafloor. Most of her superstructure lies in a mess. The hull is nearly flattened save for the bow section. Her 4 funnels are deteriorated, and she forever lies in a perpetual darkness. Diving to her requires a permit, as she is a war grave, and requires skill due to the fishing nets and jagged steel. Of the 1,959 passengers and crew aboard the Lusitania that fateful day, only 764 survive. Of the 124 children on board, 94 died, including 31 of 35 infants. Over 600 passengers were never accounted for. Among the dead were 123 Americans. In January 2011, the last survivor of the Lusitania, Audrey Lawson Johnson, passed away, joining all those who lived through that fateful day on May 7th, 1915.